Good morning, Joanne. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Well, I've been wanting to talk with you because I'm hoping that you've got the answer that a lot of people have been seeking for a very, very long time. First of all, the podcast is called Main Accounts, The Story of MySpace. I was once on there. That's where I put my music. My early days of podcasting were on space. I mean, MySpace. And it's like, but why did we stop? What happened here?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. And I can say that the answer will come out the complicated answer will come out in full through the podcast. But I would say the short answer is that social media sites are difficult to keep afloat. Yeah. Their audiences are fickle. We're seeing this with Twitter a little bit, where a lot of users kind of jumped ship as soon as Elon Musk stepped in. This is kind of the nature of platforms. And right when MySpace was starting to lag, Facebook came along. So that's kind of the history of social media in general. But it's a little bit more complicated like that. It's a little bit more exciting. And through these episodes, I hope people will stick around to see what exactly MySpace was and why so many people miss it.
Who is Benjamin Sun, and why is that name something that we should all know in the history of this?
Oh, yeah. He's one of those, unsung pioneers of social media. He founded a site called Asian Avenue and also had a few other sites similar to it. One was called Black Planet. And these were communities similar to what MySpace was, where, in the case of Asian Avenue, it was the Asian American community, and they all kind of kept in touch with each other. And he was telling me about marriages that happened because people who met each other on the platform. And it was a really exciting place. And, it happened that Tom Anderson, the co-founder of MySpace, he was aware of Asian Avenue. He had an account and he would look around every once in a while. And this was one of many, in addition to Friendster, one of the many sites that inspired him to create MySpace.
My head is just filled with so many memories as the stories that you build and create, because we were in an exploration period, just as what we are right now. But MySpace really set things forward because it became my voice. In other words, there were musicians all over the world. That was their place, their stage. And it's people like Benjamin Sun that help open that door. And all of a sudden, here's this zone. It changed the world of music.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the stories that I find incredible in my research is just how many people were discovered through MySpace. Yes. And when you think about how difficult it is to get someone to listen to your demo, to have that that moment where the A&R guys are at your show and now the next moment you're famous, that's very tricky to do. But someone just clicking around on profiles late at night, maybe they stumble upon some guy who is a kid in Scotland who works in a fish factory and lives with his parents. And, oh, wait a second, that's Calvin Harris. So that's literally what Calvin Harris became famous. He was working in a fish factory. And it's just things like that where, there were some numerous stories that I came across of people who just lived what we would consider ordinary lives, but still had passions and creativity and wanted to express it. And they hadn't given up on these dreams. They're expressing on their MySpace profile. So that's a beautiful element, I think. I think it is a thing that keeps MySpace unique, because with Facebook, it's always been kind of careerist in a corporate sense. You know what I mean? The kind of corporate jobs you could get. But with MySpace, it was definitely in those kind of dreams and creative dreams. That's what people were kind of vying for.
The podcast we're talking about is Main Accounts, the story of MySpace. I got to be honest with you. I went to MySpace before having this conversation. It still exists. And you know what? I was impressed. I mean, I've been away for a long time, but I am impressed with what they're doing right now.
It's true. It's still around, and they have, it's one of those funny things with tech companies is, you'll hear that something has died or it's collapsed or something like that. But in many cases, there will be very stripped down, not nearly as, doesn't nearly have the staff it did maybe 10 years ago, but it still exists. Now, the tricky element here is like how well maintained it is. Like several years ago, there was this story that came out that, massive amount of data, music files, video files, just was lost.
That was me. That was me. I lost mine. Yep, that was me.
I'm sorry to hear that. There have been a few efforts to like retrieve these files on the Internet Archive. It's possible to search for band names and see they were able to recover some of the lost files. But that's kind of one of these elements here of like, again, dealing with something early. I certainly, I was a MySpace user. I never thought about backing my files because this was my youth. It wasn't this thing that I imagined myself to be in my 40s looking back on my 20s and wanting to remember. I never thought of that when I was in my 20s.
Was it I think one of the main attractions is that it didn't cost us anything to put our stuff on display. But it seems like we went through an evolution there where all of a sudden other methods of sharing files came up, but they wanted money. That's why I really invested in the idea that when Justin Timberlake took over MySpace, I thought, this is it. He still believes in the process of getting things out there.
Yeah, and it's so tricky to do, and even to this day, I mean, that's what's funny about MySpace as like what it's a precursor to, because on one hand, it's a precursor to things like Instagram, Facebook, the social networking elements, but on another hand, it's also a precursor to things like Netflix, Spotify, the streaming media. I mean, another element of MySpace that I was a little bit surprised to come across is that they produce TV shows that you could watch on MySpace. And it was very funny because, like, if you go to the old profiles, you would see people in character creating, MySpace profiles and engaging with each other in character just to, like, kind of add this sort of, like, social element of promoting these shows on MySpace. And, like, This was all, I think the fact that MySpace was a precursor to so many things has to do with that no one really knew what social media was.
You're right.
Then. So the company itself was quite elastic. The company itself could like decide, well, we've got a lot of musicians here. Why don't we set up a music label? Or, it was just kind of following their own kind of whims and following their own sense of what the users wanted. The youth culture, though, I would say is the driving force there. It's like, okay, music and youth. There we go.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up the youth because bored teenagers that's something that technology wants to tap into. And I'll tell you the group that I want to check into now is this group called Generation Alpha. They are the next generation, and I want to know where they're going to go to get their music because we have to have music as human beings.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I can say one possibility is there is a 19-year-old in Germany. I interviewed him from the podcast. He created a clone of MySpace because he was so nostalgic. He was nostalgic for this thing that he hadn't experienced. And he was like, MySpace looks like what I want now as a 19-year-old. I want to have that freedom. I want to have that music. I want to be able to hang out with my friends online without this like surveillance capitalist kind of layer that I have to negotiate. So he just created a clone of MySpace, and there are kids using it. It's really funny.
When you dive into doing the research to put up main accounts, the story of MySpace, did Napster come up in that conversation? Because it seems like they were the bad boys of streaming, but all of a sudden MySpace comes along and it was like, okay, well, if I can't get anybody else's music, I'm going to put my music up there.
Oh yeah, Napster does come up, and with Napster, I would need another podcast of like an episode podcast to get into the full story because I think Napster is seriously fascinating and another element of internet history that it kind of deserves its moment. But the funny thing about Napster is because MySpace was about 5 years after the launch of Napster, there had already been this kind of like media cycle of, is it okay to is this just sharing files or is this stealing or and then those kind of legal battles, this had all kind of come and gone, and there had been a few platforms. I believe it's called mp3.com was one of them. And people were kind of like sharing their files online, and that's what MySpace offered, is this opportunity for unsigned bands at the beginning, these unsigned bands to create a profile. And because you had an area that you could put a music player, someone who stumbled on your profile could start playing music immediately. And what band starting out doesn't want as many people as possible to hear their music? It was just a great opportunity for someone starting out. So
true. And I'm blessed with the opportunity to talk to a lot of musicians, especially these up and coming movers. And I mean, there's a rock movement right now, and they know, the musicians know the places to go and to plant their music. It's not about the record company anymore. And I'll tell you, there have been a few that have said, I put it up on MySpace, and I would go, what? And they say, yes, it's still there.
Incredible. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, you've got this opportunity because MySpace lets you create a website. That's something that a lot of social platforms don't necessarily let you do, where it's like you log in and you have to be logged in to see it. With MySpace, you created a page that anybody surfing the web can just stumble on that page. So it functions like a website. That is kind of the beautiful thing about MySpace.
How much did iHeart play in this? And the reason why I say that is because I was in the beginning days of iHeartRadio, where I remember Robert Pittman at one of his meetings going, okay, we have created this, and I'm going to show you how it works. And I remember sitting there as a broadcaster going, what in God's name has just happened to everything where we get fed the streaming? Because in that moment, we had MySpace, but now here came these streaming outfits that could play continuous music.
Oh, yeah. It's just a complete transformation from where things were 20 years ago. And the expectations of music lovers, expectations of people, how you get your media, how you get your TV. I mean, that I think is what's interesting with that MySpace era. I would say, like, when I say MySpace era, I'm talking about like 2003 to 2009. Yeah. Those would be the years that it was like, it was the social network. And those years, that's when you got Netflix was around, but Netflix was a red envelope that you had to drop in the mail.
That's it.
So it was very different.
Yeah, and Netflix now is making movies, and that movie is called Air, which is about Michael Jordan and Nike. I mean, it's like, wow. I mean, will we one day see a MySpace do the same exact thing, since everybody's in moving pictures as well as music pictures?
I will say, I hope there is a MySpace movie or a TV show one of these days, because there were so many fascinating characters, even in like the boardroom situations. I think it would make it. There's great drama. Of course, I'm biased because I definitely spent some time reading up on these squabbles and this drama, but it is a very fascinating story.
Were people open to talk with you, or did they go, Joanne, no, don't go there. There are certain things that you don't need to know?
Well, I have to say, I'm still trying to get in touch with Tom. I haven't given up on it. We're recording the final episodes now, and we've still got an open line of communication.
Good.
But I think, to be honest, Tom has always been MySpace. Tom Anderson, the co-founder, has always been a kind of reclusive character. He's known for being quite, not someone who is chasing fame by any means. So if he's enjoying his privacy, I respect that. But the thing that has been delightful about this podcast is people are constantly telling me their stories of using MySpace. And so many people have at least one crazy thing that happened to them because they connected with somebody and ended up, across the country meeting them, or just like all the elements of the randomness of these encounters. And that is the thing that I can't stress enough, that like now we know what the internet can do.
I was going to say, I used it as a tool. When I was doing my music reports and in the early days of my podcasting, I went to MySpace, and then I would reach out to the artist and say, hey, do you want to talk? I would like to help spread your word. And it was a huge tool in my life.
Oh, yeah, because I'm drawing a blank how people would have connected to a local band without knowing someone. Like, how would you find their phone number? How would you find a postal address? Having someone's profile page right there, and already it was not awkward because people were just like randomly sending messages to anybody they saw. Mm-hmm. It was kind of like, it just felt like it wasn't that everyone was your friend on MySpace. It was that everyone was just a message away.
Mm-hmm. I remember when comedy promoters would tell me that there was an evolution taking place even in that entertainment business because of MySpace. And I'll never forget Mike saying, look, if you don't have numbers on MySpace, I don't know if I want you in my club, because I know that influencers are on MySpace and I can get them into my club, but you better be on there.
Oh, yeah. It's huge with comedy, too, because this is, again, like performance. This is about, well, will people listen to you? Will people be present with you? Do you have that presence? And a lot of future stars started on MySpace because they could demonstrate right on their page mm-hmm. that, we have that quality, that potential is all there.
Mm-hmm. And I love the way that you dive into allowing real people to share their stories, such as Julie and Taylor. I mean, they really added to this story.
Oh, yeah. They were such a joy to speak to. I mean, Julia Anquin, in the first episode, she wrote a book about MySpace. And one thing that I thought was fascinating is that she told me she is now like a very distinguished reporter on surveillance culture in America. One of the best reporters on that subject that you could find. And she told me it was MySpace that she really found this subject. She hadn't really thought about the potential for social media to surveil their users and the potential of what this advertising, what does it mean that you're advertising against people's identities? So even though MySpace was all very new, and I would say that their kind of data, they weren't collecting data nearly as we see with later platforms like Facebook or anything like that. But the potential was there, and a lot of like some of the nefarious elements of social media, like content moderation, where less than savory photos are shared and content moderators need to delete them. Like, that was happening on MySpace, but not as well reported on because like people didn't really understand that there was the story there. But something like Julia, that was her start of reporting on corporate social media.
You're playing a smart game with your podcast in that the episodes are pretty close to 30 minutes. That's exactly the amount of time that listeners can handle. 30-minute episodes. And if they want more, you can give them another one. You're creating binge listening.
Oh, thank you. It just worked out that way. But yeah, I've got to say 30 minutes is usually like my favorite kind of podcast time.
and it's filled with incredible content. That's the thing about it is I don't know where you're going next. And I hope that somewhere along the line, you're going to get in there and put focus on the human ego. When we weren't getting the hits anymore, why should we go to the website to download or upload our stuff?
Oh, yeah. And that's something that, I mean, I think anyone who does creative work in the modern era grapples with, where, even if you have a sense of standards and you don't measure your worth against how many fans you have on how many followers on Twitter or Instagram, that might be the thing that separates you from the next deal, the next opportunity. Mm-hmm. So it's a little complicated, and it's definitely something that people were dealing with it 20 years ago, but it's like a whole new era right now of being an influencer or showing that you have characters.
And very exciting too. That's the thing about it is I love the excitement of it all.
Yeah. I mean, there are definitely there in this case, like it's still to this day, people who wouldn't otherwise have a chance can, build a career through something like TikTok, through something like Instagram.
Yeah. You got to come back to this show anytime in the future, Joanne. I love your story. I love where your heart is. And if we've got to know these stories to grow into the future. That's just a part of the everyday world.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate these questions and the research and time you put into this.
Well, you be brilliant today, okay?
Thank you.